All right. Good afternoon, everyone who is watching this on YouTube. Just to give you a little heads up, this is a re-recording of a program that was given on spotted lanternfly. Unfortunately, the first recording just didn't work out due to technical difficulties. So I am re-recording this on Monday, October 20th, 2025. This is perhaps one of our more important offerings on the Stop the Spotted Lanternfly Report Invasive series because we want to talk a little bit about how this insect has continued to spread throughout Indiana. So, just as a quick introduction, my name is Bob Bruner. I am the exotic forest pest educator with the Department of Entomology at Purdue University, and a significant portion of the work I do is with this invasive insect. I have driven all over the state. I have visited many different infestation sites, some close to home, some much further away. And we are definitely getting to a point now where we are beginning to see it spread throughout several more counties. And I want to make sure that those of you watching are forewarned and forearmed with all the information you need to be able to understand what this insect is going to do and how you can begin to manage it. Because unfortunately, the infestation is getting to the point now where the hard work being done by the Department of Natural Resources simply won't be able to keep up with the rate that new infestations are popping up. So let's dive into this. So the picture you're seeing right now is a significant infestation of spotted lanternfly on grapes. And this is one of those major reasons why we want to try to mitigate and control the spread of this insect as much as possible. They will kill grapes, and there are several other very sensitive woody plants that we're going to discuss in a little bit here where they can do significant damage or, at the very least, become very serious nuisances. Now, a little on the general information of this insect. This is an insect that belongs to an order of insects called Hemiptera, which means they are very closely related to aphids, cicadas, stink bugs, assassin bugs, essentially all the insects that have mouth parts that are shaped a little bit like a syringe that they will poke into whatever feeding substrate they use, whether it's a plant or another organism. These are generally called piercing sucking mouth parts, or you may even hear the term rostrum used by entomologists. And these insects have a broad host range. Now, while being said, they do tend to have a small number of preferred plants in Indiana. However, there are many, many wooden plants that they could still potentially feed on, but they do tend to stick to those preferences. Now, as for where spotted lanternfly come from, it is believed that they were originally imported here into the United States, into ports in Pennsylvania, right around 2012 on some imported stone products. They weren't detected in Pennsylvania until 2014, and they have since spread all throughout that state. They completely cover it just about, and oftentimes you could see that many counties will have different signs and other things up that say stomp the spotted lanternfly as soon as you see them. They're very prolific in that area. So as for how this insect is spreading, you know the old adage, a picture says a thousand words. This one is definitely telling that tale. A spotted lanternfly can fly and just hop on just about anything, and they will tend to hang on to stuff and get moved around by vehicles. It's particularly in Indiana, they will move around by rail. They will hang on to rail cars or lay their eggs on them. And when they move around, they will land in different places. They will go ahead and lay their eggs on new areas that they are now arriving in. And much like emerald ash borer, since these insects can lay their eggs on trees, they could potentially be transported by firewood. The other thing I want to make sure I highlight, given the time of year that this is, October is Firewood Awareness Month. So we want to make sure that you are conscious that insects, especially exotic insects, can be easily transported through cut firewood. Unless that firewood has been heat treated and certified by the USDA, you should be suspicious of it. And we always ask people during this month, and really all months, to please, if you get firewood, burn it where you buy it, at least within a 50-mile radius of where or where that firewood has been cut. That way, you minimize the risk of transporting an invasive species to a new area. The reason this whole campaign started was because this is how emerald ash borer was able to spread so easily throughout almost the entirety of Indiana, and this remains just as true for many different kinds of exotic insects. All right, so what you are looking at right now is a map of the potential areas spotted lanternfly could invade. And as you can see here, those red areas, Indiana is right in the middle. Our environment is extremely similar to the environment that these insects come from, and they will have absolutely no issue finding good potential hosts here in our state. So this is why we want to make sure we are very, very watchful because we are kind of right in the sight line of this. And what you're looking at here is a map of the distribution of spotted lanternfly as of September in 2024. And you could see from what I was saying earlier as well, that Pennsylvania is almost completely covered. Anything highlighted in blue there is a county that has an established infestation. And it spread quite a ways throughout the eastern seaboard, Pennsylvania, and it's beginning to move into Ohio and Indiana. Now, if we go with a more updated map, one produced by Cornell University, you could see that that spread has definitely changed. We've moved from having just a few counties in Indiana infested. By May of 29th, we moved to about 14 or 15 counties in Indiana infested. And now, as of October in 2025, we have around 17 counties that have confirmed infestations, the most recent one including Lafayette, Indiana, with Tippecanoe County. I actually visited the infestation site there myself just a couple of days before recording this, and it is definitely full of tree of heaven, which is the primary host of this insect. And we're going to go into this a little bit more about how this insect associates with it. Now, what this picture is, though, is that this is taken from Indiana Department of Natural Resources page for the Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology. They have a website dedicated to showing a map of current infestations, as well as a tool that the public can use to report sightings of this insect. Now, I have put the website up there for you to look at as soon as you have a chance. I really recommend you go and visit it yourself so that way you can see what they have there. It's very easy to reach, and the tools that they have on that are very easy to use. And I strongly recommend you take a look to get an understanding of where this insect has gone and how you can report it. Now, before you report the insect, you need to know what you're looking for, of course. Thankfully, identifying spotted lanternfly is fairly easy. It's an insect that definitely sticks out. It has traits that make it easy to diagnose its presence, and it doesn't seem to change very much at all. So first, obviously, you were just looking at an adult, and you could see that those adults had beige wings with black spots, and the wings are kind of bisected by half of it having a darker area closer to the tips of the wings. Underneath those forewings are bright red hind wings with black and white patches that really stand out whenever the insect spreads its wings, and it has a yellow striped abdomen. Now, the abdomen you may not see very easily because the wings will often be folded over its back, kind of in a roof shape, kind of like how a cicada holds its wings over its back. But oftentimes, when they do flap their wings, you will see that yellow come out, especially if the insect has been feeding a lot recently or if they're gravid, if they have a lot of eggs that they need to lay. Now, one of the ways that I like to go through identifying an insect is first going through its life cycle. And this image here from Penn State Extension is really great for demonstrating that. So first off, I want you to note the time of year that we are currently sitting in. So we are sitting in the September to June range on this, right at the top of this image. You can see the current stage of the insect will be eggs. So right now, there are a few adults still left flying that are still mating and still laying eggs, so they should die off relatively quickly. Spotted lanternfly cannot survive our winters as an adult. They are only a univoltine species. They just have one generation per year. They will go ahead and lay their eggs this time of year and cover them with a protective substance that makes them look a lot like mud. That substance is very good for protecting the eggs from external temperature changes, from pesticides and other things, and they overwinter quite well in our environment. Those eggs will then last all the way into early springs, around April, where they will hatch out into these very small early instar black and white polka dotted bugs. They're very tiny and they will slowly grow from April all the way through July until they go into their fourth instar, which at which point they turn this bright red color with black and white dots on them. A lot of times they will be confused for a variety of different insects like milkweed bugs. Sometimes they'll even be mistaken for lady beetles. At that point, once they reach that July period, after that point, they will begin to molt into their adult form. And you'll note here that these insects do not have anything like a grub or a caterpillar stage. These insects have incomplete metamorphosis. That means that they start out as eggs, hatch into a nymph. Those nymphs simply grow larger, shedding their skin and developing into a new instar, and you'll begin to see wing pads develop on their bodies until they eventually molt a final time into their adult form. Now, here are some real world images. These were provided by Indiana's DNR. And you could see the early instar there on the left. They almost look a little bit like a weevil. That protrusion you see on their head is actually a feature of many lanternfly species. That feature just disappears when they become adults for spotted lanternflies. So a lot of lanternfly species, that feature will stick around. The late instars there, that's a great picture of them. This is the version of the insect we expect most people to see first because they are very bright red. They stand out very, very well. You can also contact local extension offices to see if they have materials that you could take with you to help you identify these insects on the go. So feel free to reach out to your Purdue Extension educators. Now, as for the egg masses, this is the stage where we are right now. And this image right here is just covered in egg masses. Some of them you can actually see really clearly where you see those little rows of eggs laid neatly one after another. Others, they look like they may be covered in mud and they may not be very visible. If you take the time to count the egg masses in this picture, you'll probably reach somewhere near 25 or so, though every time I count them, I come up with a different number. This just gives you an idea, though, that the egg masses can be very easily hidden, though sometimes not every female insect will have either the time or the energy to be able to cover her egg masses. So here's an example of some eggs that are laid on a tree of heaven. You can see these were never covered at all. What's also interesting about this picture right here is that you could see little holes in those eggs. So even though they were never covered with the protective substance, they were able to survive and they hatched. Those are what those holes were from. The insects hatched out and they began their development. Now, as for the feeding habits of these insects, I compared them earlier to aphids, cicadas, and similar species where they have piercing, sucking mouth parts. What they'll do is they will push these mouth parts into the woody tissue of a plant. And you'll often find that the nymphs will prefer the twigs, whereas the adults will prefer the trunks. So that means that their mouth parts are quite strong. They're able to pierce into that tissue very easily. Now, they are what I would consider kind of a lazy feeder. They rely on the turgor pressure within a plant to push the liquid into their body. So they are not actively siphoning it, they're just kind of letting it flow inwards. And this grazing behavior that they have, they can sit there, feed, and sit for around 10 to 15 minutes and then pull their mouth parts out of the plant and move on to a new feeding site. Now, as for what they feed on, there are a variety of plants that we consider fairly sensitive, and the insects will move pretty readily between different species. So, grapes are one that they will very readily feed on. They will feed on grapes as much as they will feed on their primary host, tree of heaven. They will also attack American river birch and several species of maple. Research done by Penn State Extension has shown that maple syrup production will actually suffer a loss of quality and yield after spotted lanternfly has been feeding on them. They will also feed on black walnut, and black walnut is a tree that's very popular to plant as a part of like a retirement nest egg or something similar because it is a valuable veneer wood. Unfortunately, black walnuts suffer a host of insect and disease problems, so this just kind of adds to concerns for people who grow it. Spotted lanternfly will also attack roses, so if you like growing roses, large bushes, spotted lanternfly may be attracted to them and go ahead and feed on them. And finally, of course, they will feed on tree of heaven, which is their primary host in their native range. There's also around 100 plus different plants that they are capable of feeding on as well in Indiana, but those are the most sensitive ones that we'll talk about. Now, spotted lanternflies have a particular habitat selection they will go through. When they find a good tree to feed on, they will continue to feed on that tree each subsequent generation as long as they can find space on it. We consider these hot trees, trees that have a great amount of nutrition for them, so they'll just keep returning. Like I said a second ago, the nymphs will prefer the shoots, the adults will prefer the trunks, most likely in an effort to not compete with their own young for good feeding sites. Obviously, they're going to move the furthest as adults. The adults are winged. However, the adults are also very poor flyers. They can buzz around, but you can imagine, say, if you're in an area that where you see cicadas fairly often, cicadas will buzz around, but oftentimes they'll just smack right into whatever they're flying towards, whether that's you or a tree or the side of a building. Spotted lanternfly are pretty similar. They can hang on to things really well, though, as we talked about a little bit ago. Now, their feeding choices are going to vary a lot through a season, and I suspect it's most likely because it is associated with when those different plants uptake the most nutrients as they develop. So you can see roses, they will attack May through June. Grape and tree of heaven, they will go ahead and feed on throughout their entire lifespan. Black walnut, they'll go after June and July, and then river birch, willow, and sumac, they will go through after July through October until they finally die off for the winter. And then maple, they'll go for August through October until they eventually die off. And that pretty well, I would guess, is associated with that nutrient uptake. I mean, I would want to look a little bit closer, but I think that's a very safe guess there. Now, I keep mentioning Tree of Heaven, and I want to make sure that all of you have a good understanding of what Tree of Heaven is. This is a nightmare, to put it quite simply. This is one of the worst invasive plants we have in Indiana. They are very widespread, especially along railroad tracks, where unfortunately there's very poor mitigation normally. They are the primary hosts of spotted lanternfly in their native range, and they are the first choice that these insects will go to whenever they arrive in an area. Almost every single incident of finding spotted lanternfly in Indiana has been associated with Tree of Heaven next to a railroad track. We do know that they reproduce quite readily on Tree of Heaven. We don't have a good understanding when they feed on other hosts yet how good their reproduction is, and that research is probably going to be ongoing for a few years yet. Now let's make sure we can identify Tree of Heaven. This tree has some great traits that make it easy, even if you are not good at identifying plants. Like me, I'm not real great at it myself. I'm an entomologist, not a botanist. However, there are a few names this tree may have. So you may hear it referred to as Chinese sumac, stink tree, stinking sumac, and oftentimes the growth pattern of this tree very strongly resembles a sumac. They can get very large, getting upwards of 80 feet high, and they can regrow from parts and pieces in the ground. They're very strong too. I have seen these trees growing through building foundations and sidewalks. They have a very noticeable smell, even as a sapling. A lot of people, you'll hear it referred to as a smell like burnt peanut butter or butter that's gone bad. It varies a little bit, but it is extremely noticeable. I've actually pulled saplings out of my own property at home because I walked by them and I could smell them, even at 6-inch saplings. Now, apart from the smell, if you might not have the opportunity to smell them, you can identify these trees very easily by their leaves. What you are looking at here is not a branch with several leaves. You are looking at one leaf with several leaflets. These leaflets, or I'm sorry, these leaves are arranged alternately arranged. So you'll find one leaf staggered from the next one down the shoot or branch that they are attached to. And then the leaflets themselves have entire margins. They are not serrated, but they do have a glandular tooth at the base of the leaf that you could see very clearly in this picture taken by my colleague Lenny Farley at Purdue. This feature is very easy to find. It stands out. It makes it even for someone like me, it makes them very, very easy to identify. So you will have very little trouble. There are a lot of people who specialize in this area who can readily identify the tree by its bark, which you are looking at here. And its bark will kind of change as it grows. On the left, I'm guessing is probably a little bit earlier growth. On the right is growth that's a little bit older, and the bark just kind of separates a little bit and forms these crevices. I know a lot of folks have confused the bark of these trees, though, for other trees like a black walnut. So I would be a little leery. I would stick to the leaves myself. They make a great way of identifying it. However, I want to make sure you understand that if you attempt to remove Tree of Heaven, You need to get all of it. You cannot simply cut it down. If you cut a tree of heaven down to its stump, it will trigger regrowth from every part and piece that is still in the ground, and you will end up with six new tree of heaven. So it needs to be fully removed from the ground. You cannot rely on it not growing back. And it makes this tree a little bit of a nightmare to work with, unfortunately. Now, as for the damage that spotted lanternfly does, this is a little bit of good news. Its damage is pretty straightforward. If you've ever dealt with an aphid infestation before, you'll probably have a good idea of what's about to happen. So as they feed, they wound the plant. They put little holes in it that they drain fluids from, and that will leave an opening in the plant that pathogens can take advantage of. Now, there are no pathogens, no funguses that are directly associated with spotted lanternfly. There is no evidence yet that they transmit a virus or anything similar. It's just that when they wound a plant, they will leave it open to getting infected by a fungal pathogen or something similar, and that can become very problematic, especially if a tree gets fed on repeatedly. Of course, the loss of nutrients that, since this insect is taking those nutrients out of the plant, is going to reduce its ability to survive winters and put on new growth as the next spring comes around because they simply don't have the energy that they would otherwise. Ways that you know that the insect has been feeding is you're going to see signs of stress. You'll see probably what looks like moisture on the sides of trees as evidence of their feeding and a general loss of resilience. If the plant is particularly sensitive, say if you're looking at some grapes, you're going to see a reduction in growth and possibly the death of the entire plant because of overfeeding has reduced its nutrient level so far and it's just wounded it far too much. Indirectly, these insects can also produce a substance called honeydew. Honeydew is a sugary substance that the insects excrete because they can't digest all of that sugar. So what they will do is they will go ahead and excrete it out of their bodies as waste. That honeydew will then fall out, like out of a tree that's being infested and onto any undergrowth or any ornamentals that are below that tree. And as it begins to land, it forms this really great substrate for sooty mold to develop. Sooty mold itself doesn't infest a plant. It wants the honeydew, but it will begin to block the plant's ability to photosynthesize, and it makes a very big, very smelly mess. Those of you who have fought off aphid infestations probably know what I'm talking about. And I highly recommend that you go and look on YouTube. Just type in the search terms for like honeydew and spotted lanternfly. Penn State Extension has several great videos they put up. This insect quite literally rains honeydew out of a tree as they feed. It is pretty awful to watch, but it does give you a good idea of just how bad an infestation can get, how much of a nuisance you're looking at. Now, just a little bit more information on some of the infestations we have here in Indiana. These images you're about to see were taken by nursery inspectors with Indiana's DNR in their department of or their division of entomology and plant pathology. I love this picture in particular because it really is kind of the heart and soul of Indiana you see here. You've got a train in the background, all this greenery, except the greenery has a big problem. All of that is tree of heaven. It is all invasive. It doesn't belong here. And this is where we normally find spotted lanternfly. If you're in an area where trains start and stop, oftentimes, especially if there's a tree of heaven present, spotted lanternfly will hop off right there. And you can actually follow rail lines leading across the northern portion of the state through areas like Mishawaka and Huntington, where you will just see infestations all over. And unfortunately, insect is continuing to travel through Indiana using those kinds of routes where we've seen infestations now in places like Lebanon, Lafayette, and undoubtedly more are going to be popping up soon. Here are some of the images taken from those infestation sites. Here you can see a fourth instar nymph that's feeding on some tree of heaven. And again, you can identify it because you can see the glandular teeth at the base of those leaves. Here are some adult spotted lanternfly that are feeding on the trunk of a tree of heaven there. They're just grazing, hanging out right there. And then a few more of them that are feeding on what I think is Virginia creeper. So you can see that they will move hosts. They will go to other places too. In fact, I do work with a grad student at Purdue, and she's been finding information that spotted lanternfly will migrate off of tree of heaven to other species, particularly black walnut, as time goes on when they begin to settle in and feed. And she's doing more research to see exactly what the nature of that relationship is, so that way we can get some good concrete information as to when they're going to move and why. Now, as for managing this insect, thankfully, this is actually much more straightforward than it is with a lot of our invasive species. These insects do respond well to chemical treatments. There are a variety of methods of applying pesticides to spotted lanternfly, including sprays, tree injections, soil drenches, the issues that you're going to continue to see from this is that you're going to get repeated invasions from spotted lanternfly, and you're going to have quite a few dead spotted lanternfly once it's done that you will have to clean up to get rid of them. There are also a few biocontrol agents that have some potential for working. There are some parasitoids from their native range that are currently being researched to see if they can be successful here. However, that research has found that those parasitoids are really difficult to raise outside their native range. So that work is just ongoing and needs more time to cook. There are two native entomopathogenic fungi that will attack spotted lanternfly in the wild, and those fungi have been put into a formulation where you can apply them yourself. They're called Bacoa major and Bavaria bassiana. However, the efficacy of these fungi may be a little hit or miss, and more research needs to happen to see how well they're going to work. So, as for what you can do, I want to go through a series of most asked questions here to give you an idea of what it's going to look like as spotted lanternfly enters the areas where you live. So, the most obvious question is what's the best pesticide to use on spotted lanternfly and how do you use it? And I'm going to go into that in just a moment. The next one there, how does this compare to emerald ash borer? Emerald ash borer rewrote our landscape in Indiana. It has killed most of the ash trees that we have. Spotted lanternfly is not going to be nearly that bad. It's going to make an impact. It's going to be a big nuisance, but it is not going to be the level of what emerald ash borer did throughout the years leading up to this. How will spotted lanternfly impact your garden or landscape? Like I said, they're going to be a nuisance. We need to see how much they're going to feed on things like greens and other woody plants to see if they're going to enter gardens. There is some evidence that they might. But we're going to be watching that and doing more research and getting more information out to all of you as soon as we know. The last question there, this is a really common one I get as an entomologist. Will spotted lanternfly bite you? This one's easy to answer. Not at all. They are herbivores. They don't recognize you as a host. The most a spotted lanternfly will do, it may land on you and then move on. You will not need to worry about them biting you or harming your family or your pets. Now, as for pesticide use or at least management of these insects, the management of these insects is going to be really closely linked with time of year, particularly when the bloom of their various host plants are and what stage of life the insects themselves are in. There are different contact and systemic insecticides that they will respond really well to, which you'll get great efficacy to kill these insects. However, some of the applications of them may require professional help. I'm going to go into those. So this chart here provided by Penn State Extension is a really, really great one. I love this, and I highly recommend you check out the information that Penn State Extension has as well as what we have here at Purdue. Now, this time of year that we're in right now, we are starting to scrape eggs. Like I showed you earlier, egg masses can be on the sides of trees. They can also be on the sides of buildings, vehicles. If you drive or live in an area where an infestation is, you should be checking your vehicle to make sure you don't have egg masses on them. You could scrape them off using something like an old credit card. And when you do so, you squish the eggs as you do it and then put what you just scraped off into like a bucket of soapy water or like a little bag with alcohol in it, maybe to make sure that they're dead. As we move into the more wintry and early spring months that you can see there, you can begin applying horticultural oils. Soybean oil is particularly effective at killing the egg masses. Keep in mind, the egg masses, since they do have that substance on them, are really well protected against pesticides. So this is why a lot of our horticultural oils like soybean oil are the recommendation there. May through October, you can begin using sticky trapping to try to eliminate these insects. However, I generally don't recommend this because it's way too easy to capture non-target organisms. And you don't want to mess with that if you're not already familiar with how to do it. Contact insecticides are effective on both nymphs and adults, and you begin applying contact insecticides starting in May. Soil drenches using systemic insecticides can also start being applied as early as late March or April, all the way through September. So basically, there you're drenching the soil in the pesticide, which then gets taken up by the plant. And trunk sprays or tree injections should be done July through September or October. That way you can guarantee that you're post bloom and you won't begin to impact other insects that you don't want to harm. So as for which insecticides themselves you can use, for a spray or contact insecticide, bifenthrin and carbaryl show really good response out of these insects. However, the residual time for some of them may vary a little bit. I believe bifenthrin has a decent residual, whereas carbaryl does not. Carbaryl doesn't last nearly as long. In terms of something you can use as a soil drench or an injection, which means you're using a systemic insecticide, dinotefrin is perhaps the best right now, according to research, and imidacloprid is a close second. And again, the application timing is important here because I know a lot of us are going to hear the word systemic and we're going to be a little leery of their use. If you apply them correctly and with the right timing, though, you will avoid impacting pollinators as much as possible because you want, like I keep harping on about, if you apply them post bloom, there will not be any pollinators there. So, and they have shown to be very effective in controlling spotted lanternfly. Now, as for other things you can do, we have been begging people to do this for a couple of years now, and I'm just going to keep kicking that ball. We want you to report sightings. Uh, Share them with the Department of Natural Resources. You can post them on edmaps.org or use the Great Lakes Early Detection Network. Here is the number to call Indiana DNR to report them, 1-866-NO-EXOTIC. I also want you to reach out to your local extension educators. There should be one in every county just about in Indiana. And if you reach out to talk to them about getting help reporting this, they should be able to help you out. And then you can always email us as well. And when you do make a report, whether you email or do it by phone, we need to know where you saw this insect, what it was doing. If it's email, take a picture and send it to us. And then you can also try to collect a sample and send it to, say, the Purdue Plant and Pest Diagnostic Laboratory. When you collect a sample to do so, get a living adult or nymphal insect, put it in a Tupperware container, and freeze it in your freezer for 2 to 3 days. That will hopefully kill that insect, and then you should be able to send it to us, or you could bring it to your local extension educator, and they will probably reach out to me to have them help them identify it. And of course, just please stay aware. Make sure you help educate your neighbors on what these insects are and what they can do. Here's some contact information from me. If you have questions or if you want help identifying or even just reporting these insects, you can reach out to me at my email. I also run social media for Report Invasive, and I write articles in the Purdue Landscape Report about these insects and other exotic insects here in Indiana. Also, check out the Emerald Ash Borer University, which should be getting started here in late October. That talks about all kinds of different invasive forest pests. Or you could check out Penn State Extension as well for the great information they have on spotted lanternfly. Lastly, this QR code here is to a feedback survey. Let us know how we did. The information we share here is meant to help you out, and the more feedback you can give us, the better we can help you in the future. All right, folks, I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you for coming to YouTube to watch this. Please feel free to reach out and contact me, and I will see you at the next program.